Liddy moved across Pennsylvania Avenue to the president's re-election headquarters. His new boss, Jeb Magruder, wasn't prepared for the phenomenon that the White House had sent him.
I have lots to talk about with people over the White House.
Liddy was in the office, and I said something as an aside that wouldn't it be good if we could get rid of Jack Anderson?
Jack Anderson's syndicated column was a thorn in the side of the Nixon campaign.
Gordon Liddy emerged from the office. He brushed by me and he said, Jeb just told me to take care of Jack Anderson.
He said, "What's that?" I said, "I am to kill Jack Anderson. I am on my way to kill Jack Anderson." He said, "Oh my God." He took off like a deer, running down the hall.
I then went into Magruder's office and I said, "Jeb, did you just tell him to rub out Jack Anderson?"
He came back in and I said, Gordon, I was just talking off the cuff. I wasn't serious. And Liddy looked at me with that stern, sort of macho look, and he said, "Never give me an order for a hit job that you don't mean, because I'll do it."
Liddy was impatient to get on with his intelligence operation. Bypassing Magruder, he went straight to the White House to ask John Dean how big he was supposed to think.
I said, "Well, if you're talking about an all-out, full offensive and defensive capability political intelligence operation, you're talking about one hell of a lot of money, first of all." And he said, "How about $500,000 for openers?" And I said, "Well, you're in the ballpark there."
Liddy promptly produced $1 million plan. He needed the approval of Attorney General John Mitchell, soon to be Nixon campaign chairman. In Mitchell's office in the Justice Department, the temple of law enforcement, Liddy presented his illegal plan, codenamed Gemstone.
Gordon had with him these very expensive, well-done charts. I think there were 7 of them. Each had different code names, and each one described some type of activity that would, in a sense, harass the Democrats.
Each different kind of operation was given the name of a precious jewel. We had so many operations, we quickly ran out of precious jewels. We went into semi-precious jewels, and by the time we were finished, we were down to coal and brick.
He said, clearly one of the major problems of this campaign is going to be the problem of demonstrations. And he said, I think, General, as he told John Mitchell, we have a good solution to that. I have retained the services of some really tough men. What I can do is direct these men to kidnap campaign leaders, drug them, and take them below the Mexican border and put them out of commission.
Mr. Mitchell said, well, where do you get people like that? And I said, it's my understanding they're from organized crime. And he said, well, what is that going to cost us?
I think for Mitchell, Dean, and I, it was rather ludicrous. I mean, here we were, in a sense, sitting in the Attorney General of the United States office, and here's Gordon Liddy talking about some of the more bizarre plans.
He said, I've made some preliminary arrangements to get a Chinese motifed houseboat that I can park on one of the canals down near the convention center in Miami. And it will have two-way cameras in this Chinese motifed houseboat, and I'll use prostitutes to go out and seduce into the houseboat high campaign officials.
They were to linger about and attract the attention of mid-range Democratic staffers who would try to impress them with how important they were by saying, oh, watch tomorrow, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. We would get all of that.
And I said, Gordon, you've got to be kidding. And he really was very offended by my interruption. And taking that offense, he said, I want to assure the General, these are the finest girls from Baltimore. At the end of Liddy's presentation, John Mitchell took kind of a long puff on his pipe, and a little cloud came up over his head and sort of sat there for a minute, and he said, Gordon, he said, I just don't think this is quite what we had in mind.
So I said to Gordon, I said, well, why don't you cut out all this other fluffy stuff that it really isn't what we're looking for, and concentrate on the electronic surveillance.
I started talking about our problem about getting a decision on the Gemstone plan. Colson did not want to hear about the Gemstone plan. He said, wait a minute, I don't want to hear any of this. What you need is a decision, correct? Yes. He said, fine. Picked up the phone, called Magruder.
I said, Jeb, these guys are in here. They can't get a decision. What are you guys going to do? either give them a yes or a no, don't leave them hanging.
What he did was clearly indicate to me he wanted, the president wanted, he always used the president, wanted to get this thing off the dime, get it going. So he wanted me to make a decision.
There was pressure from the White House, from me, and from the president to the committee to get their campaign intelligence activity going.
Larry O'Brien's office in the Democratic National Committee now became the key target of the bugging operation. It was located in the huge luxury complex called the Watergate.
What Colson wanted me to do was to get off the stick, as he said, and get Liddy's project to bug Larry O'Brien's phone and so on off the ground and get it funded.
The decision on Liddy's project was made in Key Biscayne, Florida. Campaign chairman John Mitchell was on vacation there. But Magruder could wait no longer. He interrupted his boss's Easter break to get the plan approved. What happened at this meeting has always been a point of fierce controversy.
Now, did you approve the Liddy plan?
At the Key Biscayne,
Yes.
I have never approved the Liddy plan as we're discussing it at any time, and certainly I didn't approve it at Key Biscayne.
John Mitchell died in 1988, still denying he had ever approved the Gemstone plan. The surviving participants, however, tell a different story.
Well, the last item on the agenda was the Gemstone file, and the issue now was that we either had to approve it or it was going to be too late for us to do anything. So Mitchell, LaRue, and I talked about it.
I asked Jeb, I said, what the hell is this electronic surveillance business? He said, well, that's been in the mill a long time, and I'm getting a lot of pressure to get an answer on it.
The president wants it done. Haldeman seems to think it's very important. Colson's been on my back.
Mitchell read it. He looked at me and said, have you read this? I said, yes. He said, what do you think of it? I said, John, it's not worth the risk.
To me, it was a throwaway project. You know, give Liddy the $250,000 and let's get him off our back and satisfy the White House. And Mitchell finally said, okay, let's go with it, and signed off on the paper. Actually put his initials, as he always did, on the approval box to go ahead with the project.
I've reflected on this many times, and at the Key Biscayne meeting, or even after that, had I gone to Mitchell and said, John, this is crazy. I mean, this is a harebrained scheme. It's not going to do a damn thing but get us in trouble. Let's put a stop to it. If you have to, go to the White House and back them off the damn thing. Had I done that, and done it forcefully, John would have listened to me. And he would have done that, and this whole mess could have been avoided. It's one of the real regrets I have about Watergate.
But the bugs produced only trivia.
I was distressed by them. They had nothing of value. I'm getting hairdressing appointments and things like that.
I talked to Mitchell, and I showed Mitchell what was the first fruits of Liddy's endeavor, and he looked through it rather quickly and agreed with me that these were worthless.
What they wanted was specifically, well, what's Larry O'Brien up to, and what's he doing, and what's he saying? We were going to have to go back in again and put in more devices and make sure that we got what they were looking for.
Mr. Magruder said, listen, Gordon, this is what I want. I want what Larry O'Brien has right here. And he struck his bottom desk drawer, which is where we kept what we had on the Democrats.
Well, I was telling Liddy, look, I want the real stuff, the information that's important, not this stuff that you've gotten for us that has no meaning whatsoever to the campaign.
And he was, I want everything photographed. And I said to myself, my Lord, what was supposed to be now a quick 5-minute in-and-out repair mission is a multi-hour photo recon mission.
Back in Washington, the man in charge of the fiasco at the Watergate had to make a difficult phone call.
And I wanted it to be an absolutely secure conversation. I still had a White House pass. I went over into the White House, and I went into what is known as the Situation Room. There was a KYX scrambler phone over there, and it would be available. Well, of course, there's no scrambler phone in the hotel where I'm told Mr. Magruder is. So I called Magruder, and I said, look, I need to speak to you securely. There is a missile base, a guided missile base, run by the Air Force, just in such and such a place. Go down there and hit Magruder. Why do I have to go to a missile base? Why do I have to talk to this? You know? And I said, look, I need to speak to you securely.
All I thought was there at the Liddy plane is, you know, little spy games again.
Magruder used the most secure line available, the hotel payphone. Liddy told him that 4 of the men arrested, the same Cuban Americans that used before, couldn't be connected to Nixon, but the 5th man could. He was James McCord, who worked full-time for the president's campaign. Now Magruder had a difficult message for his superiors.
He said, we got a slight PR problem. And I said, well, if it's a PR problem, that's your bailiwick. He said, this is a PR problem that requires a lawyer.
For Nixon's men, keeping Watergate away from the president was going to be a nightmare. A few hours later, the campaign high command, their wives, and the First Lady, Pat Nixon, were at a Hollywood fundraising party. There they hobnobbed with movie stars Clint Eastwood, John Wayne, and Charlton Heston.
On one side, it was a great party. I mean, it was wonderful. The women were having a great time. My wife had a great time. On the other hand, I'm still on the phone talking to some of my staff, trying to figure out really what's going on back in Washington after this disaster that occurred the night before.
I went to the room for something, and my wife said, Fred, what's wrong with you? He said, you look strange. You look like you're really upset about something. I said, I just can't talk about it right now, but something has occurred that could very well bring down this administration.
On day 3 of Watergate, the White House was already up to its neck in obstruction of justice. There would be no going back, and the president's campaign committee still held the original evidence of the crime, the transcript of conversations bugged at the Watergate, codenamed Gemstone.
I said to Mitchell, what should I do with the Gemstone files? And he said, I think you ought to have a fire in your fireplace tonight. Well, of course, it was late in June, a rather unusual time to have a fire, but that's what he wanted to do, and that's actually what I did.
Magruder, as deputy campaign chief, had to explain away nearly $100,000 that Liddy used for Watergate. Magruder concocted a story that the money was budgeted for campaign security, but that Liddy, all on his own, decided to spend it on a break-in.
Now, what I had to do was, number one, I had to go to the prosecutors and tell that story and make that believable, but number two, I had to have somebody to back it up.
Well, I refer to this as the sting. I was in my office, and Jeb came to the door and asked if I could join him in his office.
Well, I pitched it to Bart basically on the basis that I needed his help, that we were in a quandary, that this guy Liddy had gone off on his own, had done these things that had really created problems, but we had to have some way to justify giving him the money.
Magruder asked Porter to corroborate the story of a meeting at which Liddy's $100,000 budget was supposedly approved.
Basically, the bottom line was, if anybody asks you, it's kind of if anybody asks you, whether it was an attorney or whoever, anybody asks you, it would be helpful if you could remember a number like around $100,000 that we discussed at that time. And so without much ado, my big error, of course, was that I said, yeah, I would do that.
They would have to testify under oath before the Watergate grand jury. If the prosecutors and the jurors didn't swallow their story, Magruder would be charged. Inevitably, he would drag Nixon's top aides down with him.
We were all aware that I was going to go up and perjure myself, and that was the way the cover-up was going to work. You go up and you testify to why we spent the money with Liddy, and then you bring Porter in and he backs up your story. We were not 5-year-olds.
It's a lawyer's distinction, but I must say, and it's self-serving, that I did advise him. I said, Jeb, I can't tell you to go in front of that grand jury to perjure yourself, but I will tell you, I'll give you a good question, and I know exactly the kind of questions they're going to ask you. And so I spent about a couple hours just grilling him and getting him ready for his perjury.
Magruder took his oath and told his lies. Then it was Porter's turn.
I had to repeat this particular story about the $100,000 amount, and all the rest of it was all the rest of what I said there was quite factual. My mention of the $100,000, as we know, was not.
For the moment, Magruder got away with it. By the time John Dean returned to town, he had made up his mind. He would not be the president's scapegoat. But Dean was not the only one to be named by McCord. John Mitchell's deputy, Jeb Magruder, had lied under oath to protect the cover-up. He asked for a meeting to see if he could still rely on his fellow conspirators.
Well, Mitchell's line was that he was going to stick by his story. The line that Dean took was that he was going to tell the truth, whatever that was.
And I listened to Jeb as he was trying to sell me on buying into his story, and I said, Jeb, well, I might have said that, but I didn't say I was going to testify that way. That's a big difference.
The difference, of course, now was that I was the one who had committed perjury, whereas Dean hadn't committed perjury, so I was stuck.
In fact, so was Dean. To avoid perjury when he testified, he would have to confess to his own crimes. And as soon as he could, he sought the advice of a top criminal lawyer. That afternoon, Mitchell's former deputy killed off the idea of a single scapegoat. Jeb Magruder went to the prosecutors and corroborated John Dean's story.
They realized that it wasn't just Jeb and John Dean and Gordon Liddy, it was John Mitchell, it was Bob Haldeman, it was, half the people in the White House and at the committee to re-elect, and maybe even the President of the United States.